Hello and welcome. My name is Teresa Trombetta, and I'm Assistant Vice President for Alumni and Constituent Engagement at CMU. I'm also a proud alumna of Hines College. I'm thrilled that you could join us for today's panel discussion. For more than 40 years, CMU has been a leader in robotics technology. We are continuing to lead by pioneering soft robotic materials and systems. Softbotics is about bringing robotics into everyday life, creating imperceptible robots, and developing highly symbiotic, complex systems that seamlessly integrate with human life. I'm so proud to bring three of our amazing faculty experts together today. They'll share how CMU's groundbreaking Softbotics research is bringing robots into households, workplaces, hospitals, and even the natural world. I'm so glad to see you all here for today's discussion. And it's going to showcase CMU's commitment to transforming the human experience and to tackling society's greatest challenges. I know you'll have questions as we hear from each of our amazing presenters. We ask that you please submit them through the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation, and we'll address as many as possible during the audience Q&A at the end.
So it's a pleasure to share this vision of Softbotics. And as Bill and Teresa explained in their opening remarks, the big idea here is to engineer machines and robots that put humans at the center and are really designed for everyday life. Really at the heart of this are materials, and really how we think about the mechanics and deformability of materials and how they'll enable this new generation of soft machines and robots. And if we think about materials currently, how they're used in our everyday lives, for the most part, they're passive. I mean, if you think about the materials in clothing and whether it's in athletics or recreation or in our work, or materials say used for mobility, say like in a cane or a walker. These materials provide a lot of assistance, a lot of function, but they don't have a lot of the active functionalities that we associate with computing and robotics. And so if we want to introduce active functionality into these material systems, today at least, we typically have to introduce motors, computing devices, and fairly bulky hardware that can make these systems uncomfortable and very cumbersome to use. And so the idea with soft robotics is that we want a new generation of robotic systems and machines where we have materials that allow these systems to be used in all facets of daily life. And then really central to this is to create multifunctional materials that have integrated sensing, actuation, and intelligence. These materials need to be soft and lightweight and compatible with the natural human tissue that they come in contact with, say like our skin and our muscle. As Vickie and Sarah are going to explain in a bit, materials are just one component of Softbotics. What we also need are advancements in integrated microsystems. We also need new architectures for interfacing these materials with biological tissue. So we'll hear from them soon about these other aspects of soft robotics. Now, what's really exciting here in this field of Softbotics is that there's a lot of really exciting recent advancements that we can leverage. Here's one example of a soft robot that's inspired by the starfish. And so what you'll notice here is that the starfish is able to achieve mobility. It's able to follow this ping pong ball here that's floating in this water bath. And it does this without using any motors or bulky hardware. Instead, it uses artificial muscle actuators and it uses miniaturized electronics to achieve these goals. And so one of the things that we're looking at is to take these same material architectures and now applying them to wearable computing systems and creating these so-called electronic skins. And so I'll play this video here, and hopefully this gives you a sense of how soft, how flexible, and how stretchable we can engineer these electronic skins to be. We can incorporate all sorts of microelectronic components for sensing, for signal processing, for radio communication. Later, Sarah is going to talk about some of the more recent advancements that we've been seeing in embedded microsystem technologies that will allow for the next generation of these electronic skins. What's also exciting about work like this at CMU is that it involves a very interdisciplinary group where we have faculty from many different departments, many different colleges who are all contributing to creating these types of electronic skins that really are going to have immense value in healthcare monitoring and then also human-machine interaction. Another project that fits within the scope of Softbotics is to create wearable devices that are not only capable of sensing, but also have active functionality that can be used to support in human motor tasks. And so this is just one example of what we call a soft exoskin that has materials that can change shape, they can change the stiffness and adapt themselves to the needs of the human. So as you imagine, these material systems can have tremendous impact in activities like gaming or human machine interaction, but they can also have a lot of value in rehabilitation or in areas of physical therapy. Again, another area where we're seeing tremendous opportunities for interdisciplinary work and engagement from faculty across different departments and colleges. And then lastly here, a emerging area where we're seeing advancements through soft robotics and soft electronics is in this field of teleoperation and haptics. And the idea here is to create machines and robots that can help augment human capabilities in environments that are otherwise inaccessible or dangerous. So imagine a robot working in some remote environment. It has this soft electronic skin and this soft tissue. It can kind of feel and interact and touch and work in an environment much in the same way that a human would, and then all of that sensory and tactile information would then get transferred back to a human user who could then have that experience remotely through a haptic interface. This is an area where we're seeing tremendous opportunity, not just in new engineering with soft materials, but also incorporating AI, machine learning, also collaborating with folks within human psychology to create these next generation softbotic systems for teleoperation and haptics. So materials certainly have a really central role within this, but as you'll hear next from Sarah, embedded microsystems also have a very important role within Softbotics.
All right. Thank you, Carmel. So Softbotic systems, like the electronic skin that Carmel just introduced, will ultimately become far more useful for some of these applications if they have the ability to sense and actuate at a really fine-grained level with these embedded microsystems. So I'm excited to share with you some of the examples of how we're providing this embedded sensing and actuation for Softbotics at the microscale. So first, I want to mention a couple big benefits that we get when we combine these tiny features from microfabrication with soft materials. And I have a couple equations up here, but I promise I'll keep them brief. So this slide illustrates sensors made entirely of soft materials like rubber. So the gray material is conductive and the blue material is not conductive, and these form a capacitor. And we can sense deformations in this structure by monitoring the change in capacitance. And what the first equation is really telling us is the benefit we get from going small. If we make the blue layer thinner, we're going to get bigger changes in capacitance as this structure deforms. And the second equation is telling me the kind of deformations that I can measure. If I use a soft material with a small Young's modulus or small e that can deform a lot, I can measure larger deformations. And overall, this combination of small features and soft materials will get us sensors that more closely approximate the really high dynamic range sensors that we all have in our own skins. So here's an example of this in action. This black square here that you see is actually a strain sensor that's composed of a lot of really tiny interdigitated comb fingers made from both conductive and non-conductive elastomers. To give you a sense of scale, your hair is typically 50 to 100 microns in diameter, so there are a lot of these comb fingers kind of within the size of a human hair. And combining these small features from microfabrication processes that we do in a clean room with these soft materials that Carmel just talked about ultimately gets us soft strain sensors that are both highly sensitive to changes in strain and can sense very high strains up to 100%, so twice the length They're robust and they don't break. So how are we ultimately going to use these? So in this case, we're going to take some inspiration from biology. So even simple organisms like the insects that you might find flying around your house or in your backyard have thousands of sensors throughout their bodies. On one side of the wings alone, there can be hundreds of sensors, strain sensors in particular, scattered throughout. And our biologist collaborators are hypothesizing that insects use these sensors to operate in challenging environments like gusty conditions. If we tried to fly a UAV in these same gusty conditions, at least a small UAV is very likely to crash because of that unknown disturbance. And so what we'd like to do is ultimately take those sensors that I just talked about with those very small features made out of those soft materials and create skins of those over very large areas. So this wing is approximately 70 centimeters long, and we want to be able to sense deformations in the wing of a UAV during flight, a lot like those insect counterparts are doing. And this can ultimately give us advanced warning if there are disturbances like gusts that we need to react to. And we've actually flown these systems with our collaborators in Colorado and demonstrated that we can get useful sensing data from these sensors that are laminated on the wing. You can see those sensors as the UAV flies overhead. And this also serves to emphasize that Softbotics don't necessarily have to be used in completely soft systems. In this case, the Softbotics are enabling both robustness, ultimately the UAVs crash a lot, as well as the ability to sense deformations that we couldn't otherwise sense with traditional strain sensors. So I also wanted to talk a little bit about embedding small actuators into our Softbotic systems. Carmel mentioned the idea that we could provide this remote sense of touch to an individual with Softbotics. Now, if a robot like Robonaut here is feeling something up in space, the idea would be that a human could feel that exact same thing on Earth. But there are a lot of questions still as to what kind of actuators we need to provide this realistic sense of touch. Now, there's some pretty impressive, but actually pretty costly and still pretty simple systems that do exist out there, like this system from Haptics. And so to test out some different actuator designs, we're ultimately turning to a manufacturing process that a lot of you will be familiar with that's pretty standard at larger scales, and that's 3D printing. So there are systems out there, there are 3D printers out there that can print really small structures. So this Eiffel Tower has a base that's only about 200 microns across, and the little octopus that you see there is about 120 microns in diameter. And that octopus is actually a combination. We print it as a combination of both rigid materials as well as soft materials. But regardless, both of these structures are completely passive. So Carmel mentioned this problem that a lot of materials are just passive. They don't do much other than this kind of structural function. So we want to be able to enable them to move. So to make those tiny actuators, we're ultimately combining this 3D printing with more traditional microfabrication processes to create structures with conductive metal coatings. So this right here is an example of a rotary actuator. So it's a lot like a servo motor at a large scale, but in this case, it rotates due to electrostatic forces instead of electromagnetic forces. Now, the entire actuator is only a couple hair diameters long, and the actuator could ultimately provide forces due to the way it's moving, like shear forces against your skin, as well as that would ultimately give you a sense of slipping or skin stretch, both very important tactile signals. We can also integrate these actuators into Softbotics by printing them directly onto flexible printed circuit boards. So using this technology, dozens of these actuators could be printed in the size of a human fingertip in a very compliant system that you could wear. So the ability to engineer sensors and actuators at small scales and embed them into these Softbotic systems is a pretty key component to the functionality and ability of these systems to ultimately make our lives better. And with that, I'll pass this over to Vickie, who will tell you a lot more about how we can more closely integrate these systems with the natural world.
Thank you, Sarah. So as we continue to develop these Softbotic systems like the ones you've seen so far, we're working towards a goal of ubiquitous robots in the real world. And our goal is to safely transition these technologies from the research lab into real-world environments and to have them safely interact with living systems. As this research advances, we want to achieve this translation in an environmentally conscious and responsible manner. Therefore, active and adaptable Softbotic materials are needed that are biocompatible, renewable, and possibly even biodegradable for applications, especially in biointerfacing or interactions with living tissues, and for applications environmental deployment, where we may want to deploy these Softbotic systems into sensitive ecosystems. Unlike traditional robots, the biological systems that inhabit our natural world are already composed of dynamic responsive materials. For example, tissue growth is guided by biodegradable protein structures that can be remodeled by the cells over time and adjust their mechanical properties. The muscles that allow us to move are both adaptable and self-healing. And biological brains are capable of complex computation and learning. In my lab, we are focused on biohybrid softbotics. We want to be able to learn from and even harness these material capabilities. To do this, we start by studying the biological organism. And through that study, we can identify and characterize renewable biocompatible materials that could be used in our Softbotic systems. We also develop appropriate fabrication techniques for use with these materials. Then, using this material and these fabrication techniques, we're able to build adaptable living actuators, and we're working towards building energy efficient living controllers. And all of this comes together in order to create soft, bio-inspired robots that can themselves safely interact with both us and our environment. We can create biocompatible structural materials using extracellular matrix proteins, such as collagen, like in your skin or tendons, which can be compacted into strong and robust fibers and sheets. We can manipulate the structure of these materials such that it can be used to control the alignment of living tissues that are grown on it. Additionally, we have developed scalable fabrication techniques to allow us to use multi-material additive manufacturing in order to embed these robust fibers within otherwise very soft hydrogels in order to provide structural reinforcement. And this allows us to 3D print robust and yet still soft structures at relatively small scales. Additionally, we are exploring two approaches to build soft robots with living adaptable actuators. In our first approach, we can harvest muscle actuators from farmable organisms, such as the muscles from the feeding apparatus of marine sea slugs. This allows us to maintain the natural structure and capabilities of the muscle, as well as any interfaces to motor controllers in the biological system if desired. And these explanted muscles can then be combined with soft 3D printed bodies in order to build simple robots using materials that are likely native to an ecosystem we may be interested in deploying these robots in. Alternatively, we're collaborating with a number of researchers here at CMU in order to grow and stimulate living actuators using tissue engineering techniques. And this approach will allow us to be able to grow the muscles directly on the desired Softbotic structures. While we have demonstrated that we can fabricate structures and actuators using these living materials, true Softbotic systems need control. And here, the living material actually poses a little bit of a challenge. Our preliminary work has shown that the muscle actuators fatigue quickly if controlled using electricity. So now we're beginning to explore the possibility of growing living neural motor control circuits to serve as an interface between Softbotic electronic skins and controllers, like you've seen in the earlier presentations, and our living actuators. In order to do this, we first need to understand how these neurons grow in these culture conditions and use that information to design models and predictive tools to both predict and then control the growth of these neurons into functional controllers. Not only is this research helping us towards building these living motor controllers, but these studies have also led us to develop new techniques with our collaborators for growing architectures in simulation that can be used for machine learning, inspired by how the neurons grow in the culture dish. And we found that this can lead to improved performance in image classification algorithms. We've also worked with collaborators in neuroscience to use information from these studies to create models of biological brains that can then predict the neural activity and behavior of our animal models. And we hope that these tools in the future can be used to help design these future biohybrid robots. Through this research, we are creating the building blocks needed for renewable and biodegradable biohybrid softbotics. There's still a lot of work and resources needed, but through this research, we're laying the foundation for environmentally and biologically friendly robots in our future vision of ubiquitous softbotics. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention and invite Bill, Sarah, and Carmel back to continue our discussion.
Well, thank you very much, panelists. What an exciting vision for the future. I'd like to move to the phase where we have a discussion. And as moderator, I will ask questions of you. And audience, please, you now can start entering your questions using the question and answer button at the bottom of the page. And we will collate those and I'll ask those of the panelists. Let me start by taking the moderator's prerogative to ask a first question to set the stage. And the question really is, why Softbotics now? What are the key advancements in the past that made this new area of research possible? And what's the potential that we can achieve?
Start on some of the microsystems advances that have really enabled us to start embedding these microsystems in these soft material systems. So a lot of that is two things, I would say. One is both the manufacturing processes that will allow us to kind of incorporate these soft materials at these very small scales. So that's fairly new. And then I think the other thing is modeling and an understanding of how these soft systems behave. So as engineers, we like rigid bodies. We like things that we can model very easily, and these soft systems are not that. And so the idea of understanding how these small bits kind of interface with these larger soft material systems and being able to model that is a key advancement that's allowed us to start pushing this area forward a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, I can add that another factor here is kind of from the demand side. I mean, I think that there's kind of, people are more aware of how automation has had such a tremendous impact in industry and industrial automation. And so there is this kind of increasing need to have a lot of these machines come out of the factories and kind of in more domestic environments where they're in kind of tighter proximity with humans, and you know, there's that potential for physical human-machine interaction. And so this kind of growing need for kind of computing systems and robotic systems that are in physical contact is also what's driving this.
And the motivations for the biohybrid systems really kind of build on a lot of what Carmel and Sarah have been saying. We've got these new fabrication tools, we've got these new tissue engineering techniques, and we're starting to see robots kind of permeate out into our everyday lives and into the real world. And so we're also looking at future-proofing a little bit, right? How do we make sure that as we're doing this, we're preparing these robots to be safe and compatible with these environments that we want to put them in?
Thank you, panelists. Let me ask you one more question to get going, and we've got a lot of great questions coming in. This question really brings together the work we heard all of you talk about. And I wonder how you envision future interfaces between the biohybrid softbotics that we heard about and the softbotic skins and the circuits that were presented today. How can we bring those things together?
I think I'll jump in and start on that one, and anyone's welcome to chime in as well. This possibility of bringing this all together is really exciting to me, because so many of these tissues we work with in this more biological space are sensitive to the environment that you put them in and the mechanical loading that they're experiencing. If you try to grow these living actuators on something really rigid, it actually damages the performance of the actuator, right? So we really need softbotic materials, whether they're synthetic or biological, to interface with any of these biohybrid systems. And so we can really envision this future where things like the electronic skins and the micro actuators are providing the supporting interface for the living materials that bring us the adaptability and robustness to changes in the environment that we need, to bring it all together into these integrated systems. And that wouldn't be possible without the kind of collaborative research environment that we have right now.
I will quickly add, I mean, this builds on Vickie's earlier point about sustainability and the impact of these materials on the environment. I mean, that's another big factor that's driving the interest in natural materials and you know, these sustainable materials and you know, incorporating more kind of biomaterials and organics into these systems. So that's also been a big driver.
Thank you. Let me follow up on that and ask a rather practical question. Are these materials available for 3D printing today? Do we have commercially viable ways in which to make these? If not, when do you expect commercial products of that be able to be made and be able to be available?
So you can 3D print with soft materials and you can buy commercial inks for this or resins for this at both large and small scales. I think the challenge is really to get the functionality. And this is something that I know Carmel and I in particular have already worked on quite a lot, is kind of combining some of the functionality of his conductive materials, for example, conductive soft materials, and being able to 3D print that and get those materials exactly where you want them in order to create these kind of sensors and actuator architectures that will ultimately let us do these kind of softbotic things.
Anyone else like to follow up, or should I go on to the next question?
Well, I can just quickly add, I mean, this is one of the areas where I see the biggest kind of opportunity for very near-term impact in terms of translating a lot of what we're doing here into the commercial space. So there's a lot of work right now in just taking what folks like Sarah and other folks at CMU and kind of spinning out companies and having commercial products out there. So.
Thank you. I'd like to combine a few questions that are coming in from the audience, and they're about challenges. One question comes from a chemical engineer, and this person says, what are the material challenges in sensors? For example, stress sensors and their miniaturization. Another question asks, what are some of the challenges that would need more theoretical work in mechanics? And maybe broadest at all, what are the really big challenges in moving this work ahead? So you can answer those three questions in whatever combination makes most sense.
There's a lot packed in there.
A lot.
I could talk a little bit about some of the material challenges for sensing, especially at the small scale. So there's a little bit of what I touched on just now as well, and this is something that I know Carmel has worked on quite a lot, is how you make these really conductive soft materials that stay conductive as you stretch them, as much as we're stretching a lot of these materials. So they maintain the same properties over these very large strains, and some of these materials are several 100% strain. And so there is still a lot of, I think, important work to be done in that area, especially for a lot of the different kind of sensing and actuation modalities that we want to be able to use. So there's conductive materials, there's magnetic materials, there's piezoelectric materials. There's so many materials that we would love to be able to have those properties with this kind of soft framework around it. And so there is a ton of research to be done in that space. And the idea of being able to put those materials exactly where I want them with something like 3D printing, like mind blown, that would be amazing. So those are the kind of things I think that we're tackling going forward, and some of the real challenges ultimately of how we incorporate all of these modalities in these architectures.
Okay. Yeah, and I'll say those same kind of opportunities as we expand this material palette and kind of achieve and access all these functionalities that Sarah's talking about, that also makes it all the more important to have effective modeling tools, whether these are deterministic modeling techniques or stochastic based or AI driven, data driven tools. The fact is that as we widen this design space, there's no way that just heuristically, based on our own instincts, we're going to be able to find what the right compositions are. But we really need to rely more and more on these modeling techniques. And so that represents kind of another really exciting opportunity here.
I'm going to chime in on this one too. The modeling thing is also going to be so critical as we bring in some of these biological materials, because as engineers, we really like things to be predictable. And living tissue just is so much more stochastic than anything we deal with traditional materials. So we need the physical design tools to design the structure of these robots, but we also need new control algorithms that are going to be able to account for that noisiness in the materials that you wouldn't see with these traditional metals and plastics.
Well, thank you all. That was I know you could go on with that question for another couple hours, but Vickie, you said something at the end that really leads in well to what I wanted to ask next, and maybe you could start with an answer and others could chime in. The questioner suggests that a main difficulty in building very small sensors and actuators is this really large level of sensitivity you may have, and that the sensors you may build may act as chaotic systems in this person's thought. So the broad question based on that is, how do you make systems robust at the system level when the sensors themselves may have a huge variability in the accuracy of their outputs?
That is a fantastic question.
That's so too.
I'll let Sarah chime in on the specifics of like the synthetic sensors, but this is a place where I think the step of learning from biological organisms can be really important, because biological control systems, there's been some study in neuroscience that they actually benefit from the noisiness of their sensors, and that noise looks like noise to us when we process it as signals, but is actually functional in a way. And so we may be able to develop controllers that benefit from the fact that our sensors are a little more chaotic or a little noisier, and be able to use that to improve things like behavioral flexibility in our robots to be able to adapt to real world dynamic changing environments. And I know Sarah unmuted herself too, so let her.
Yeah, I'll also add to that. I'd say the kind of high sensitivity that we're getting, that is relative to a very small sensor. And so in general, high sensitivity is not our problem. We're trying to make ourselves sensitive enough to some of the small strains and deformations that you might see in these systems, as well as the large strains. So that's why I was talking also about these high dynamic range sensors. But to Vickie's point that she just made, we work with a lot of biologists and biomechanics folks. And one of the things that biology does that I think is so amazing is, I mean, they have lots of sensors, right? But they're not necessarily collecting lots of information at all times. And so there are certain kind of spatial integration processes, or looking over time at small changes and when these kind of sense signals occur, that make you much more robust ultimately in a control algorithm, for example, even though your sensors might be fairly noisy in there. So there are definitely strategies, and we want to be able to take advantage of the fact that we could embed a lot of sensors in these skins to get us that robustness in our overall Softbotic device. In the end, sorry.
Okay, thank you very much. I agree. That was a very important question. Now I'd like to move, and there's a whole bunch of questions coming in about the practicality of this and when can it be used in different settings. So let me start by asking, how are human behavior measured, and how do we understand things about human behavior using the on-the-skin sensors? How do we translate this into something used? And this person is asking and wondering, how this work might integrate with neurological sensing work for amputees or people with other sensory disabilities. And I'll follow on with a couple other questions in this vein, but let's start there.
Sure, I can take a first stab at that, although I'll be excited to hear what Vickie and Sarah have to share. But the project I talked about with the electronic skin, I mean, that's kind of one of the areas we're seeing the kind of the nearest term impact with these technologies. And so, so long as these technologies and these electronics aren't too bulky and they don't really kind of interfere with natural activity, then it seems to allow for kind of more compliance and users seem to be more accepting of it. But there are also some users who would rather have these technologies implanted, so they don't even have to see them at all. So this notion of kind of imperceptibility in these technologies, so invisible, you don't feel it, it doesn't really interfere, but at the same time, it's providing some kind of assistance or value to the user. That's kind of one of the really important criteria, and that's what distinguishes Softbotic technologies from a lot of what's been done historically.
Anyone else like to follow up, or shall I proceed along this line? Let me proceed. There's a lot of good questions here. Maybe in a related way, how will or how can these Softbotic systems be used in medical prosthetics? And maybe to follow on that, there's maybe a more forward-looking question that asks, will these Softbotic systems become integral parts of us as beings? And how do you envision that might happen?
I'll leave the second question for Vickie with the Biohybrid, but I can answer a little bit on some of the near term of what we've been doing in terms of kind of prosthetics and these wearable sensors that Carmel just touched on. And some of the skins that we've worked on, I mentioned strain sensing, but we also look at pressure sensing. And so even near term, there are real challenges for folks who wear prosthetic devices, especially think of a lower leg amputation or something with sore spots and hot spots with the interface between the person and the prosthetic. And so the more you can really understand where those hot spots and stuff are developing through these kind of sensing skins and the like, the better off you can be, right? And so you can actually control your prosthetic a little bit to alleviate those and make it more comfortable to wear. We've also, I think, touched on a lot of these, the idea of these imperceptible Softbotic systems, of being able to wear them ultimately to help you with rehabilitation, physical therapy, the idea of being able to do that at home, right, outside of a clinic, lower cost. I think there's so many benefits to these kind of technologies in these wearable systems, whether they're for prosthesis or for something that touches all of us probably on a more regular basis in things like therapy.
Vickie, do you want to follow up?
Yeah, if I follow up on that, if we think even kind of further out, right, this biohybrid technology is still kind of in its infancy, and there's a lot of tissue engineering work needed. But things like implants can be thought of as a step towards these biohybrid systems where we're hybrid with the human, right? And one thing that is really interesting about this is we can think of the biohybrid soft robots as models for basic research in biology, right? If we need to test something about a musculoskeletal regenerative repair or an implant or a sensorized wound healing kit, can we test it on a soft biohybrid robot first before going into something like animal studies or patient studies? And use these to make sure we understand how the tissue functions, how it repairs, how it organizes, and then use that to build in the future these biohybrid prosthetics and biohybrid implants to actually kind of benefit patient lives.
Well, that's really exciting, and I think forward looking. A related question that's come in, and I know you'll have something interesting to say, is is there a plan to make human organs? Is that part of what we can do?
So this is a great question. And in my research, I focused a lot on neuromuscular systems and locomotion and control, but there are some really fantastic engineered organ initiatives here at CMU, in particular in our biomedical engineering department. And people are looking at the possibility of how do you build biohybrid, lung systems for replacing things like ECMO, and how can you build biohybrid pancreases to help with diabetes treatment? And all of these are just another type of biohybrid system that often needs to be soft, because if you're going to implant it in the body, you need that mechanical match between the tissues you're implanting in and your device. And so that's another space where we can bring Softbotics researchers together with biomedical researchers to create biohybrid organs.
Thank you. Let me move on. There's so many good questions. Let me see. I'll paraphrase because I don't see it in my list of questions here, but one of the early questions came in, said, "This is fantastic. Are you taking summer interns?" So I'll let you answer that one, and then we're going to shift a little bit to ethics, and then we're going to have to close.
I mean, I do take summer interns, and I'm really delighted to have folks, but not just from within CMU, but also from outside. And I've some of our best work has been done by undergrads and who've come worked in my lab, or folks kind of visiting, even just as visiting scholars, not necessarily themselves undergrads. So yeah, it's something that a lot of us have had really great experiences with.
Yeah, and I'll add to that as well. I think one of the really challenging but also fascinating parts of the Softbotics is how it's so interdisciplinary. And I think, no one person is going to have all the knowledge that you need in order to create these kind of systems. And so I think this diversity of perspectives that you get from, people from different backgrounds coming in and working on these problems is truly important. And I think you saw this in some of Carmel and Vickie's slides when they're talking about these collaborators across different colleges, psychology, human-computer interaction, chemistry at CMU. Like, it is really important to have those diverse perspectives in these kind of systems.
Thanks. Vickie, would you like to answer, or I actually have a question that's made right for you I can ask you? Maybe.
Oh, well, we can do that, and I'll answer them both together.
All right, fantastic. So this question is about the ethics, and there's been a number of what you all are doing, and there's been a number of questions have come in. Let me try to put them together. First, can you speak a bit about the ethical issues of biohybrid softbotics? And another writer who is a robotics engineer and an alumnus of CMU asks maybe even farther out ethics question. It says, if we go the biohybrid way, this could lead to more efficient and faster solutions to many things, complete tissue and organ growth and so forth. Are there ultimate challenges as these biohybrid things we build become very advanced that also will need to be faced? You can imagine science fiction questions that might arise.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So this is a really important part of any research endeavor, but especially, I think, any sort of biological research endeavor. Whenever you're working with biological materials, we want to make sure that all of our trainees have responsible conduct of research training. We work very closely with the compliance office and the animal care office on campus to make sure that we're taking care of our animals well, that we're maintaining our facilities. And it's really important whenever you're engaged in this type of research to be thinking about what the benefit of the research is, right? We want to be addressing important needs. And sometimes in basic science, we're looking a little further out, right? We're seeing this need that is over the next 10, 20 years. But we want to make sure that anytime we do a study with biological organisms or biological materials, that the need for that influences our decision of what we're working with, whether we're working with a commercially available cell line or working with the animals directly, and how we're engaged in that research. I'm also starting to collaborate with a number of ethicists on this very question. We're going to hope to put together some more guidelines in this space, because this is an emerging field, and these are really important questions that we talk about before we get to that science fiction picture in the future. And especially as we start getting into places that have patient care applications, right? Then that benefit is really important, and we'll need to go through the proper steps of bench work, possible animal work, working with patients to make sure that we can get it safely to a place where we can integrate with humans.
No, thank you, Vickie. You know, we'll have to move on to a wrap-up question in just a minute, but I want to acknowledge a very forward-looking aspect of this topic you've been talking about. And the writers suggest, since the ultimate goal might end up in creating robotics that can match or surpass human capability, do you ever have hesitations you'll reach your goal, that robotics will evolve leading to these softbotic entities, if you will, recognizing their own existence, and what are the risks there? So if that may be way too far in the future, but have you ever thought about those kinds of things?
I think that's, well, in my mind at least, that's where the human-centered element comes into play. I mean, I think a really key element of Softbotics, and a lot of what we do as engineers, is to make sure that we keep humans in the loop, and that we're not just creating basically these fully autonomous systems that are just going to be going off to do their own thing. So really, I think as long as we adhere to keeping humans at the center, then we can avoid a lot of these potential pitfalls.
Great answer. Thank you. Let me move on to the final question. And this is a question for all of you. If there were no barriers, where do you think you could take this research in the next 15 to 20 years? And what resources or connections would you need to make that happen? So why don't we start with you, Carmel? We'll just go around the virtual table.
Sure. I would say the area that I'm very excited about is in the kind of the medical and clinical domain. So using these technologies for human motor assistance, and then also for physiological monitoring. I mean, a dream that I have would be something akin to like a hospital on the skin or clinic on the skin type technology, or, as Sarah alluded to, also, physical therapy at home. And so that's something that I'm personally excited about. And we've had the opportunity to also work with spin-off companies from Carnegie Mellon that are kind of pursuing those different directions. And so the types of stakeholders we would need for that are, of course, clinicians and professionals, and also, users within that space.
Thank you. Sarah, your turn.
Yeah, I'll also add to that. I love the kind of the idea of being able to wear your physical therapy effectively and be able to get this kind of continual monitoring out in the environment. And I think to the second part of the question of what you need to make that happen, I'm going to double down a little bit on both the materials, which we've obviously talked about a lot, but also some of the design tools. Because I think one of the really fascinating and yet really challenging parts of this is that traditionally robotics has kind of two big design spaces. I can change the geometry of the robot, or I can change the control system of the robot. And now we're adding this third design space. If I can change the material at any point in the robot. And so how do we explore that design space to ultimately create useful softbotic systems for these kind of applications that Carmel just mentioned?
Thank you, Sarah. And Vickie, you have the last word before I close.
I would just add on the design spaces and making sure that they can handle the stochasticity of these materials. In the next 15 to 20 years, I really think that we'll be seeing kind of this scaled manufacturing of these systems, being able to reproduce reliably these biohybrid systems, especially, is one of my kind of dreams for the coming decades. and being able to get them into applications beyond the lab. But right now, the lack of the design tools, the questions about the biocompatibility of the material are all kind of grand challenges that we're facing in this field. And to address those, we really need hands in the lab, right? So students and trainees who are interested and excited about learning these interdisciplinary techniques and maybe stepping outside of their engineering comfort zone are going to be really important to keep advancing this forward.
No, thank you. Thank you, Vickie. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Carmel. What a great field that you are actually inventing, this new field of softbotics, you and your colleagues at CMU. I'd like to close by both thanking the behind the scenes people that have made it possible that we can have this faculty dialogues session. And I'd like to thank all of you, the really large group of you that came today and were really active participants in that you sent us a really long list of questions and gave me the challenge of trying to put them together in a way that that I could answer as many of them as possible. So thank you for joining us today for this episode of the Faculty Dialogues. We're so appreciative of having you engaged with us, and please feel free to reach out to any of us, in particular panelists, if you'd like to have more discussion or you have more questions. Thank you very much, and please enjoy your evening.